on water issues, you're working on Wi-Fi issues, you're working on women's issues, you're working on really who's got what jurisdiction and how, what are the tremendous challenges jurisdictionally of affecting change in any of those areas.
Right, and so and this is kind of like,
give us a 101 on
yeah, and that's kind of like the whole treaty thing. Is a bit of that is as you move everybody out, and as you as you look at what is jurisdiction. So there were treaties made with Indian tribes because they were sovereigns, and they are now considered dependent sovereigns, right? So they were their own nations, and we entered into treaties with them because they were sovereigns. And so now they are what they call dependent sovereigns because they they don't sit under a state, they sit kind of equal with a state under the feds. And so their main, they make their own laws, but then the federal controls so much. And the feds said, okay, we're going to take all your land, it's not going to become Montgomery County. And in exchange, and in many of the treaties, it states this, we will provide education and healthcare, are the two major things. And then other things, you'll have fishing rights, you'll have these, we'll make sure you're okay. And so there is now what they call a trust responsibility where because we now have all this land, the federal government has a responsibility to act as a trust. If you've ever been a trustee, you've ever had it, it's the same concept as a trust. The federal government has to act in the best interest of the tribes that now exist. And there's 400, I should know the exact number, I don't, Nathan, 467 federally recognized tribes. Some of them are like me and representing Navajo Nation, which is the largest in terms of, it's the size, their nation is the size of, Virginia or something, like a major state, and they've got,
No help from the wings.
I know they're not shouting it out. I used to know it. My district is now the size of Florida, so I keep forgetting when you do this. And several hundred thousand, over 300,000 members. To some tribes that are very, very small, that might be 10 families, right? Because we've eradicated so many of them. So we have this responsibility, and there's jurisdictional issues of law enforcement, right? And who can enforce. And so sometimes you hear about Give an example, and the one that's really scary is if you've heard of missing and murdered Indigenous women. The reason, and this gets me so mad, the reason why Native American women are prey is because nobody protects them. And the people that are supposed to protect them is the Department of Justice and the FBI and the federal government, and they don't. And they don't because we don't fund them. I just met with the FBI agent in charge in New Mexico. There are 70 FBI agents intended to cover the entire United States for Indian issues. So, if a man comes, and they're mostly men, but not all men, there are missing, we now call it missing and murdered Indigenous people. He can come on, rape, kill, kidnap. It's not from the reservation. That tribe has no jurisdiction over that non-Indian. So that tribe might have a police force, and they cannot arrest and try him. So where you want to prey on young women and girls, where are you going to go? Exactly. So we finally worked to get those 3 groups of women covered in the Violence Against Women Act. But we've not put the resources to protect our women, whether they are immigrant women, whether they are lesbians or trans or Native women. And so that's some of the things that we've worked on. We plussed up the numbers. So what did we get when we plussed up? Meeting with the FBI agent in charge today, they got 1 extra person in their office to cover New Mexico. My district is 20% Native American. It has some of the highest numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women because they're prey, especially on the Navajo Nation has a lot. So those are the kinds of things that we fight for. So sometimes there are things about literally the dignity and the life of the women in the communities to water. I mean, water is incredibly scarce in the Southwest, and water rights, theoretically, in the West, you guys don't worry about water the way we do in the West. It's like water fights, huge thing. It's not sort of with balloons. It's like a real, like we call it agua es vida, water is life. I've seen that tag around here now. But first use of water, well, who was here? So who was first using water? You get the right to that water. First use. There's a called the first use. It works in the West. And so now, but now there are all these other people using the water. So I have right now 3 water settlements because everybody else needs to use that water. The tribes actually have the legal right to use the water. And so like saying, okay, we will give up our right to use this water if the federal government pays us to give our water rights to everybody else who now needs it. And those are things that like we have to get through. But they're like, interestingly enough, Republican districts have water rights settlements too, and so they're going to be more in favor of those things. It's interesting. Indian issues are actually very often bipartisan issues. When I was chair of the Subcommittee on Indigenous People last Congress, I went to the House floor at 3 different times and managed. So getting a whole day on the House floor where it's like, you know, I want a day on the House floor because I have a bunch of tribal bills I want to happen. Like I went to Steny Hoyer, who was our, back then, he said what you had. And I said, we can't just celebrate, you know, indigenous, what do we call it now, Native American Heritage Month. It's like, it doesn't do any good if we all write something nice about Native Americans. It's like, I want floor time, give me a day. And so he did. And so I took it, and I put all these bills on, and then I realized I didn't get all the bills I needed done. And so I said, can I have the end of the week, the end of the month too? And I put my bill, which is stopping tribal objects of patrimony, which you pointed out, so that we have laws that protect. These are for sale because these are amazing artists who are, I love seeing the red dots. If anybody else wants to put some more dots, they are doing amazing art that makes us think. But there are objects that are patrimony, that are sacred, that to people who made them and know how to revere them. We have laws that you cannot go and loot in Greece and bring that stuff over here. You can't bring it in. We don't have any laws that protect the taking of American patrimony, which is mostly indigenous, out and being sold in Paris. So I got my first independent bill that got signed into law by the president was the Stop Tribal Objects of Patrimony, and we got it signed, bipartisan, House, Senate.
What was the date on that?
I don't remember. What was the date on it? December? It was there. We got a lot of stuff done. So
amazing during a very tough time.
Yeah. It was really great to get the first bill. We pointed out today that Jim Jordan, who wants to be Speaker of the House, never got a single bill in his entire term in Congress of the 18 years. I got mine my first term in Congress, you know. I got a lot of other stuff done too, but that was pretty neat to be able to get that across the finish line. So it's a wide range of things that when you're working on indigenous issues, it ranges from that to you know, indigenous health, right? Native Americans were some of the most hard hit during the pandemic because they live in overcrowded conditions, and we now know that it was passed, right? And like they gathered together, and then they gathered together because somebody was ill, and then it just happened. And they were great though, like IHS, Indian Health Service, like we complain about them all the time because they are underfunded, right? Anytime you underfund things, they're not going to be able to perform. Indian Health Service hit it out of the park. They had the highest vaccination rate. They delivered in this crisis in a way that was really wonderful. Oh, so one of the great things we did last year was, so Indian Health Service, right? It's where we promised to provide health care, so it's where...
Who runs it? How's it funded? How
it's
much?
Funded by the federal government, huge numbers, not enough. It's funded at amounts that are about 40% of need. It is underfunded below what prison health is funded. So we fund veterans' health better, we fund everybody else's health better, but IHS. The other thing that we do is when the federal government shuts down, IHS it shuts down too, right? They don't shut down, they keep working, but they can't hire anybody, they can't enter into a new contract. People show up because they're essential, they don't get paid, but it is the whole thing. Because anybody who has a business or even a household, imagine, when you're not gonna get a check, you stop buying things, right? You continue to do what you need to do. But what we got this in last Congress is we got advanced appropriations. So if the Republicans shut down the government, IHS gets to keep working its way because we got them fully funded, like they were funded 2 years in advance. So that's a really big thing we got. But we only got that for 2 years. So one of the things I'm working with, Tom Colon, is getting that permanent. And this is the kind of work that even in this craziness, I'm working with him. I now sit on the Rules Committee, and he's the chair of the Rules. There's 4 Democrats, 9 Republicans, so you can imagine what it's like. It's the committee where all the big bills go before they hit the floor. So, like, I am the tip of the spear with my other colleagues, like messaging everything and making sure all our colleagues know what's in those bad bills. And then I'm like, Tom, can we get, and so he and I, like, he's getting, like, I got a native nutrition bill, and the base bill, so it will become law whenever we finally get appropriations, a native nutrition bill that will say tribes get to do their own nutrition. So in New Mexico, it's the 3 sisters of beans, squash, and corn, or in the Northwest, it's the salmon and the wildfires. They get to say, this is what is healthy and culturally appropriate to be feeding our children. And so that's one of my bills that it's not going to be a standalone bill that the president signs.
Because this all been imposed, all of the,
yeah, we
what's
send
right, what you're allowed to speak, what you're allowed to say, how to
what you eat. Yeah, and so that's like undoing that. We call it food sovereignty.
That's
so,
big.
Yeah, so that's like the kind of thing that you're able to get done, and I've been able to get that done, like even now that we're in this process. And so that's what you look for. You look for the places where you can, and then you're very clear, like, you know, I went to go visit him after, because McCarthy had him manage his, you know, don't fire me. And today he managed Jordan's, please elect me. And he's actually a good guy, and I said, I do not regret my vote. And he said, oh yeah, her and I don't agree. He was introduced, he smokes cigars. And he goes, her and I, you introduced me, we don't agree on things, but she's a very fine daughter, and she goes, she's in the zone. Native American thing. And he's the highest ranking.
And you've got to work with him.
And I got to work with him, and he's on these issues. We work well together. He likes the fact that I work it as hard and remind him and push him. In fact, when I was up for Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples, because I was a freshman, to get a chairperson, it's not that common. I called him and he goes, well, I'm not on the big committee. Why are you calling me? It's a Democrat. I said, because you're well respected. I want you to know who I am and why I'm going after this, because we're going to work together. He goes, okay. So it was like very so.
There you go.
Yeah.
Have you sort of spread the wealth on this approach? I mean, do you ever compare notes with other members and say, how are you managing to work with so-and-so on this?
Yeah, the Congress, especially in the Democratic caucus, but in general, Congress is a place of relationships. And I need to tell you, I am blown away by my colleagues. I'm blown away by Elbosa DeLauro, who's been there for as long as she's there and was chair of appropriations. And her child tax credit, which brought so many children out of poverty, she worked on that issue for 16 years before she got it passed. 16 years. She was so committed to it. And so, like, that's what I think about sometimes. You need, and she cares about that, and like, we're working on the supplemental, and she goes, and we're gonna make sure we don't, on the supplemental to cover, whenever we get a speaker, we'll have Ukraine, Israel, the disasters, and childcare, right, because that's gone. And she's like, we need to keep childcare there. And she's not gonna give that up. And we're all like, yeah, childcare. And so we're all with that. And the interesting thing is, they kind of know they need it too, because their workforce in their states aren't able, everybody needs to be able to have access to childcare. for those essential workers that we all thought was so important, but once, we went past the thing, we're not honoring them the same way we did.
So there's some reason to feel good about the work on the Hill.
But in the Farm Bill, we actually did a whole piece around what do we need to do to change the way in which the federal government, not just in the tribal funded, but in these other funds, changes the way that we support these aspects of it. So when I say food sovereignty, it's not we required it. Remember, I think we always need to think about what is our aspiration, and that is the aspiration. And the aspiration includes those elements as well. It includes the ability to make sure that you regionalize our food systems, that you make it possible for those who are living on and from the land and love the land, and that whether that be Native American farmers, Latino farmers, or farmers in Nebraska, small family farmers in Nebraska who are trying to grow the right way, that we stop funding the kind of agriculture that historically we have funded that is so bad for the environment, it's so bad for the soil, it's so bad for the water, it's so bad for the economy, it's bad for the ability of families to stay on the land they love. And this switch is something that we started in the way we were funding things. The Inflation Reduction Act actually had some wonderful pieces to be able to start addressing that. And of course, it's all in the Farm Bill. All of that is really at stake right now. We're actually wondering if the Farm Bill, so the Farm Bill gets reauthorized every 5 years. It is one of the biggest bills. There's like a couple of really huge bills.
What was the last value of the Farm Bill?
The actual number value, the cost of
Yeah.
tens of billions, but it's actually hundreds of billions.
It's close to $1 trillion in the 5-year period.
Yeah, for the 5-year period, but like what the agriculture, so what it does is authorize what you're gonna do, and then every year we appropriate. But what they're doing this year is they took the agriculture appropriations based on the old Farm Bill, and they took it from, we had increased it, they took it and they put it at 2007 levels. Right, so taking, and the biggest piece of the Farm Bill is nutrition support for women, children, veterans, old people, homeless, on and on. So that's kind of what they're doing with it. But that's what we're trying to do with the Farm Bill, but we're realizing the Senate is gonna, so we're all in the House like, okay, thank heaven the Senate. Last Congress, we were like, that darn Senate, like we're doing all this great stuff in the House, and they're stripping it over in the Senate. But we did some amazing stuff, and now we're like, thank heaven Senate, right? Because this is the approach they are looking at in the Farm Bill, which the Democrats have, but we can't get through in the House right now, that it might actually be better if we don't pass a Farm Bill, if it's gonna look at like what the Republicans would want in the Senate, and maybe we just limp along, but we don't wanna limp along, so we want the Senate to like bully the House into doing the right thing. But I agree with you.
What I have a question. What aside from, and not aside from, it's a massive issue and still under-sourced and undercovered, Native American needs. In addition to Native America's needs, where are other areas that you can find agreement with the public?
There's a lot of different places, and I think we need to, one of the things that we need to recognize that we actually did, Democrats actually passed with Republicans on a bipartisan basis, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, right? They took the country to the edge of a financial disaster and renegotiated the Fiscal Responsibility Act, right? And it was bipartisan. Now, more Democrats than Republicans voted for. I think 147 Republicans voted for it, but that's 147 Republicans. Now, what's happened is that McCarthy had given away so many levers, because all he wanted was to, when all you want is a title, you don't care about anything, right? Everything's negotiable. But there were enough people that didn't want us to go in, Republicans, so we got 147. They are now not wanting to honor those top line numbers. And so that's why we ran into, because they are appropriating instead of a number that is like flat from last year, they're going back to 2007 on that, and they want military to be really high in those things. So, but that was a bipartisan bill. The continuing resolution was a bipartisan bill. Now, once again, more Democrats voted for it. And what we understand is they didn't think we'd go for it. They thought that we would say no, and that the government would shut down, then they could blame Democrats. That we would blink, because you care too much. That's how one of them said, you guys care too much, really win on these things. Like, because we do, we don't want our people, when I say our people, I mean America, right? And the kids in, or the food aid, a lot of that food aid is to those places where we're seeing refugees come. But when we make conditions worse there, guess what? They come here, right? So it's not just America, it's everywhere else. But that was a bipartisan deal. And that's why McCarthy lost his job, because how dare he work on a bipartisan method? But he created that monster, and it ate me. And that's why we were you don't know the work that we do in our district to make sure the American people, and that we repeat, we need a bipartisan path forward. That's what we keep saying now. Because you can't get any of this done if you don't have bipartisanship. It just is how the place works. It needs to work like that. And a lot of the big things we did the big infrastructure, we call it the bipartisan infrastructure. We didn't get very many Republicans in the House side, like really, you can't even you could count them, there aren't very many of them. But on the Senate side, they got what they needed to be able to hit that 60. And our CHIPS and Science Act, which is going to revolutionize so much.
Talk about that.
CHIPS and Science Act is going to make it it's going to finally, so we can make in America, but we need in America, right? And part of that is to bring manufacturing back. If you look, for the first time in a long time, manufacturing is on the rise. For the first time, because we are now investing in the research you need that will lead. This is why I love what we did. We are investing in things that are not going to have their return for 10 years. It's important to invest for the long term, not just short term, and we were brave enough to do that. What I'm sad is that
Isn't that sad that you have to say that?
Yeah.
It's where we are now.
Yeah.
It's where we are now.
And but in a place like New Mexico, we're investing, so we'll hopefully we're investing in our labs. I want us to be, I keep calling it the Enchanted Innovation Hub. Do you like that?
Do you have Sandia?
We have
Los
Sandia, we have
Alamos?
Los Alamos. We have a fossil fuel economy that we will have to transition
Tell
off.
us about Sandia and Los Alamos, what those two.
If you don't know Sandia and Los Alamos, well, anybody see Oppenheimer? You know what Los Alamos is? But they do, a lot of the work that goes into that science is actually applicable in a civilian manner. And it's very important to track all kinds of things in the civilian world, from what happens with our storms to, if anybody is interested, you can rent the linear accelerator at Los Alamos that's used to work up the to this proton, that neuron, for $8,000 a day. And so for $8,000 a day, if you happen to have an idea that would lead to having maybe some of those protons go and find your particular cancer in your pancreatic, so that you could actually provide the chemo directly there. Because pancreatic cancer, some of these cancers, you cannot put enough chemo into the body, you'll cure the person. But if you could get it directly to the pancreatic cancer, that's stuff that can come out of these labs, right? And for $8,000 a day, the linear accelerator, love that. So a lot of what I do is try to push for places like Sandia and Los Alamos, which is in my district, to do more technology transfer so that we move more of that budget
And move
away
more
from nuclear.
Exactly, move that that military stuff off the shelf that can be converted into civilian,
Mhm.
get it in the marketplace.
Mhm.
Got people
Yeah.
making some money too.
Yeah, making some money, the United States needs to have places that are innovation hubs that aren't just in Boston and Denver and San Diego, because people can't live there anymore. And we need to create, this is my vision of the world, let me go off and neighbor it, is that we need to create an America where you have thriving economies in multiple places. And thriving economies are going to go into the future. And that's the great thing about the CHIPS and Science Act, is they recognize that, and we recognize that it's important at places like New Mexico. So like, I have been working on trying to get more innovation hubs, because that's why we put it in there, was so I could get, I wanted it in there so we could bring it to New Mexico, right? And, Senator Heinrich, Senator Benway Lujan, and others in Congress, they recognize that we need to do that, so that we are not creating, I think, the stratified America that you might talk about if you read the articles of people are moving to the states where they feel more like this or like that. The other big thing I do
Slow
is,
down for 1 second.
okay,
You do a lot of big things. But this New Mexico investment in the conversion, especially of these technologies, and putting it out there into the marketplace and bringing up the talent pool is a huge deal for a state that has been in the very, very, very highest numbers in illiteracy and in poverty and all kinds of. So this is and digital desert, which we've got to talk about briefly too.
Yeah.
Some Wi-Fi desert, but it's remarkable. And what I don't want to take this for granted, because what you said earlier about it's so incredulous that you can get this done. We can sort of get these things done, and we have to say how good it feels to get something done when it should be de rigueur, but that's just where we are.
and I think that's the problem right now. When you look at the actual numbers in the United States, we're actually doing really good, but people don't feel it, right? And when you see like consumer spending is, off the moves, how much we're spending more money in
But their
Halloween.
mental outlook.
Their mental, even though they're going and spending more on Halloween costumes this year than ever before, right? That is, people who have some money in their pockets are gonna go spend that much money on Halloween costumes, but their outlook is a bit, because we often just talk about how hard it is, and we need to recognize the pain. We need to recognize the fact that for too many and for too long, they can't afford to buy a house. They can't do that. Wages have been falling over it. For the first time, real wages, as compared to inflation, are finally growing. For the first time, right? For the first time. And that is, Biden likes to call it Biden economics. I think we did a whole lot of work in Congress to make it happen. But it is for the first time. For the first time, the debt curve has started going down, because we are manufacturing, collecting more here, and collecting taxes, right?
And capturing talent here.
And capturing talent here and trying to keep stuff here. So there are things that are happening that.
Let's open this up.
Yeah. So anyway, but let me finish this
Anything?
thought. I want to finish this thought.
I'm just start thinking
So
about your
think
question.
where I want to go is that where we are at in the United States is we are in this incredibly scary, dark time where people are feeling really, really scared. Financially, they're scared. They're rightfully feeling scared about our institutions, our democracy, about will we be able to be a pluralistic place where we do not ban books and ban diversity, and rather embrace, and we feel strong enough that we are curious about each other, so we come to exhibits about Native American. We're in this place where there is such a backlash against that. But we are also in this place where America can be the first country in the history of the world to be a place where we can actually be the first pluralistic society, a democracy that includes all of us, regardless of whether you're Native American or you're Vietnamese or whatever, right, that you came here. For the first time, we can be a place where, like New Mexico, which is a pluralistic state, like California, which is a pluralistic state, like Hawaii, which is a pluralistic state, where we are no longer afraid of each other, but we are curious about each other. We are so curious. We show up at galleries to want to hear about what's all of this stuff. Like, we are curious about each other, and where we can actually be more inclusive on an economic level. And that is like the work that we have been working on. And there is actually an idea that the idea of prosperity, that we are bringing that back in. And I talk about prosperity a lot because, and I quote, when I'm on the campaign, and now I quote it on the floor of the House, Jeremiah 29:11, which says, Lord's plan is not for us to suffer, but to have prosperity, hope, and a future. And what we have been doing the last 2 years is we have been making that prosperity plan possible. And it is working, and we need to keep this sort of prosperity plan going. And that's why we need to win back the House and actually keep this president and do the miracle of keeping the Senate. Because what we did the last 2 years had not been done since the New Deal.
We had a lot to undo, too.
We got to undo. So that's where we can go. So are you guys with me? I'm going to put prosperity class.
What's bothering you the most these days?
I leave when I get, I'll tell you what I do is when I get on my little plane. Those of you who come to Santa Fe, I don't know if you fly out of Santa Fe on this teeny tiny little plane, you know, and really cold in the morning at dawn. And I fly up and I actually imagine the families making their breakfast and making their coffee and making their tortillas or making whatever it is they make. And they're not the ones making it in Santa Fe. I think about the people and you know, on the reservations where I've been, have been fed breakfast. I think about the people in the rural areas, you know, and what they're cooking and how they're working to get their families together and going. And I think that I have such an obligation to them, and that the people who do hold the majority in the House right now don't even know. And so that worries me, is that they are truly invisible to the people who hold the majority, because they're willing to put their lives at risk. They're willing to have to be hungry. What they're willing to do for the political gain is scary. So that's what worries me, that the people who know the most need our help, what happens to them. I don't think, I mean, we want to change this. I think it's not that they're invisible. I think that they don't care. And I've said this on the floor. I've gotten on the floor, and then every time I say Spanish on the floor, I have to write it up, so you're not supposed to use a different language on the House floor. So I call them, one of the biggest insults you can give in Spanish to call someone a sinvergüenza. You have no shame. Because then that means you have no shame, right?
You're bereft.
You
ain't got nothing.
You ain't got nothing.
Yeah.
And that's it, is that they don't care about the number of people who are harmed or hurt or die. Look what they did with COVID. A vaccine, right? The vaccine. We didn't know what we were doing. Yes, the school should have been open, but to keep people from using a vaccine that would save people's lives, right? There's no shame in that. There's no shame. They have no shame about the number of children who will go hungry. They have no shame about the number of babies who will be hungry because they have to women infected children. Yeah. But anyway, we're pretty.
That's some aerial view you provided us. Yeah, I can see that. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I can understand how that would be quite agitating. That disconnect between what you must do and what you're responsible for and what you're compelled to do and what the daily trips are, just trying to get there. Anybody have anything they'd like to add or? Over there, please.
I never got an answer. She puts out like 15 things. It's like,
Come on, we have a question over here? Something at point?
Hi.
oh, the Wi-Fi.
Congresswoman, I wanted to ask, like, what really, like, inspired you to, run for office and, out 30, so I guess kind of with the growing number of younger people coming to Congress, like, how do you see that kind of, like, the value of that, or, do you see more young people, being more civically engaged? Like, what do you think our future's gonna look like with more diverse voices of all ages and backgrounds like yourself?
Yeah, well, the great thing is that when I got to Congress, the 2018 was the most diverse Democrat class ever, freshmen, the 2018 freshmen. And then in 2020, when I got elected, we had the most, there were only a few of us, there were only like 14 of us. We were the most diverse class ever. And then this last year in 22, the most diverse class ever. So it's really great because every year it's the most diverse. And when you look at our caucus, it is so diverse. It's so wonderful. And we now we have our first Maxwell Frost, who's Afro-Latino. He plays in a salsa band. He's a drummer, and he got involved because of a shooting. Right? He got involved because of the shootings, the school shootings, and so people are being motivated to come for different reasons. Nancy Pelosi, when I was so glad that I got to serve with her as a speaker. I love Hakeem, I love Catherine, I love Pete. I'm actually closer to them because we're coming up together. But she would always ask, what's your why? Right, what's your why? And everybody's gonna have their different why. My why is truly, I truly love my New Mexico. I mean, every time I've left it, when I went off to Yale, it's like, I gotta go home, right? I've gotta go back to New Mexico. I would leave, and I went to Stanford, I gotta go back. I thought I'd be a Latin Americanist. Oh my God, if I am a Latin Americanist, that means I'd have to live in Latin America. That's not New Mexico. Right? It's like, what was I thinking when I came and did a little stint here during Clinton White House College? Like, oh, if I stay here, I won't be able to be in New Mexico. Being a Congresswoman is perfect for me, because even though I hate those flights, I go back and forth, right? And I serve New Mexico, and I am truly in love with these diverse communities that I am so lucky to get to represent. And I am so lucky that I get to walk into these homes that then I can remember what it's like when I get on that plane and they feed me and they tell me what they need and they tell me their stories, and we share, we share stories, because life, every one of us is about stories, and we share stories. And so everybody's going to have what is their motivation. And I think being involved, whichever way you figure it out, that's your why. Like, we all have our different whys and you do it at different times. One of the things that I learned representing tribes is I put a war chief on. We were trying to save a sacred lake from being destroyed by a coal mine, and it was like, I have to put a war chief on as my expert. It's like, they're like, she's putting a war chief on as her expert. What the hell is next? It's like, yeah, I'm going to qualify as an expert. Every you are attorneys, you have to qualify your expert. And so I have to qualify as an expert who could receive testimony by war chief. And I said, what does a war chief do? He goes, I pray. And it's like, and how do you pray? And so when I was preparing, I said, so you get up and you pray like that this bad thing doesn't happen, you pray for your community. Like I was let me teach. And it's like you pray in concentric circles out. And a prayer is not complete until you include everybody and everything in that. And so I think we need to get to a place where we know how to pray in a manner that includes everybody in that prayer. And so that kind of motivates me, is to get to a place where we make our policies from a place of love for everybody that should be in that prayer.
I'm going to close on that.